So, Maya, look, Donald Trump has said a lot of incendiary things. Many more were said by other people at that rally, right? But Ian Sams from the campaign, the Harris campaign, posted today that the campaign is now seeing evidence that this so-called joke about Puerto Rico at the Trump rally is leading to movement and growth and added support from Puerto Rican voters in battleground states. Do you think this might be the thing that does move voters? And if so, how can the Harris campaign try to maximize that?
I think what we're seeing very clearly is it is one of the things that's moving voters. I think the challenge with someone like Donald Trump is that because he says so many incendiary things, it's easy for people, and I think we've seen it, people sort of starting to act as though he can say anything and continue to get away with it. I think that voters are more sophisticated than that. I think that people are seeing not just this one remark as it's sort of, that somehow crossed a line when other things didn't. I think what they're seeing is a totality. And I think they're also seeing that at this point in a race, if those are the types of comments that his team is able, because let's be real, maybe the comment came from someone else, but the campaign 1000% signed off on everything that was going to be said on that rally stage, because that's how campaigns work. People don't just get to go up there and go rogue. If that is the message that he thinks is valuable for a closing argument, people are just starting to see they are not a part of the coalition that he is trying to build. Donald Trump let everyone know that Latinos are not a part of the coalition that he is building. That was the message that came out on that rally. And I think that people are seeing that, and that's why we're seeing that movement. And what the Harris campaign needs to do to capitalize on this moment is exactly what they've been doing. She has been running an incredibly inclusive. The idea is we need to be, this can be a campaign that all people can feel at home in. Her message has been, I will be a president for all Americans. And that's what she needs to keep leaning into, because that is the easiest way to draw a contrast with what Donald Trump is doing.
Gavin, so it does seem that the political landscape, what's on the minds of voters, is different than it was 36 hours ago. You just look at the Google searches, you look at the internal information Ian Sams is saying that the campaign has. You look at the headlines, right? So help me understand, what do her speechwriters do with that?
So I think her speechwriters continue to do exactly what they've been doing. As we were talking about before, the goal of today is for the vice president to really deliver her closing argument. As I've been listening to her speeches over the past, 3 months, which is how long she's been in this race, what I've noticed is that her speeches and the overall strategy sort of evolved in 3 phases. First, really utilizing speeches to introduce the vice president, or in some cases, reintroduce the vice president to the American people. I was a part of the speech writing team at the DNC in Chicago, and that was a huge strategic focus for our speeches that week, to make sure people at home came away with knowing who Kamala Harris is as a person, as a leader, what motivates her fight on behalf of the American people. And then we saw her through her speeches really lay out some bold and comprehensive policy visions for the next 4 years around issues like home ownership, small business creation, even laying out plans specifically for Black men. And we're seeing the polls starting to shift. As a result, right now, it's all about laying out that closing argument. I think the backdrop of being on the ellipse where Donald Trump staged his January 6th coup will sort of do a lot of the talking on its own, in sort of painting that picture of the destruction and the damage that Donald Trump will do to our democracy if he's sent back to the White House. But she will, again, really focus on, here's my vision for the next 4 years when it comes to the economy, when it comes to actually fixing the border crisis. Because here's the thing. Donald Trump is great at going up there and spewing rhetoric and talking about problems, but only one candidate in this race is actually committed to coming up with solutions. And so I think that in this last stretch, the vice president will continue to use her speeches to lay out those policies, lay out who she is, lay out that vision, while in tandem hitting the ground game and going to communities that need to hear from her the most.
But the location, potentially 40,000 people, who knows how many watching on TV, would make it arguably the biggest speech of her political life. So take me behind closed doors. Harris said over the weekend, I let the campaign people deal with all the other stuff, meaning polls and, research. I am responding to what I'm seeing. So as someone who's worked with her, how involved is she in crafting the final wording of this speech?
No word comes out of the vice president's mouth that isn't hers, and that is a fact. I was constantly blown away by her political instinct. She's been doing this for a very long time. And she says this often, her values have not changed. Throughout the whole span of her career in public service, she's been committed to fighting for the American people. And through the actual experience that she's had with everyday people, whether in San Francisco or when she was a district attorney, or in Michigan or Georgia, wherever she's traveled to since then, she incorporates the stories of everyday Americans into the words of her speeches.
So can I interrupt you there for a second? Because I am curious. Yeah. She didn't give a lot because most prosecutors don't. Most cases get settled, but, in some sort of plea deal. But I wonder how much her experience you've seen as a prosecutor who gave closing arguments informs how she deals with crafting those speeches.
Absolutely. So she was a courtroom prosecutor for a number of years. And during that time, she almost every day was laying out facts to tell a story and to move people to action. And I saw her employ that same approach when it came to crafting her speeches. She understands, like few other people, how to do that. I think she recognizes that today will be the most high-profile and consequential set of closing arguments that she has and arguably will ever deliver in her life. So I know that she's up to the task.
All right, Maya. Yeah, there's the balance, though, right? She's got to figure out the balance. And I wonder, is there a risk that she might lean too heavily into a so-called joke by a warm-up act for Donald Trump at the risk of overshadowing her other strongest issue? Of course, that's abortion, the one on the minds of most voters, which is the economy. How does she balance all of that?
I think, look, she needs to make her affirmative case for this country, which I think is what she's been doing. But I also think that it would be silly to think that in a moment like this, drawing the contrast with Trump is not a huge part of that vision for the country, right? We have two choices. By its nature, a comparison is going to be a part of what she's laying out. So I don't think that she needs to shy away from that. I think that what she can do is remind people of what he is doing that is so divisive, and remind people of what she is doing that is about bringing people together. And I think you can do them both at the same time without it feeling like she's leaning too hard into one thing or another that Donald Trump did.